Chapter the 5th of A Modern Utopia. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christopher Taylor. A Modern Utopia by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 5th. Failure in a Modern Utopia. Section 1. The old utopias, save for the breeding schemes of Plato and Campanella, ignored that reproductive competition among individualities which is the substance of life, and dealt essentially with its incidentals, the endless variety of men, their endless gradation of quality over which the hand of selection plays, and to which we owe the unimaginable complication of real life, is tacitly set aside. The real world is a vast disorder of accidents and incalculable forces in which men survive or fail. A modern utopia, unlike its predecessors, dare not pretend to change the last condition. It may order and humanize the conflict, but men must still survive or fail. Most utopias present themselves as going concerns, as happiness in being. They make it an essential condition that a happy land can have no history, and all the citizens one is permitted to see are well-looking and upright and mentally and morally in tune. But we are under the dominion of a logic that obliges us to take over the actual population of the world with only such moral and mental and physical improvements as lie within their inherent possibilities. And it is our business to ask what Utopia will do with its congenital invalids, its idiots and madmen, its drunkards and men of vicious mind, its cruel and furtive souls, its stupid people, too stupid to be of use to the community, its lumpish, unteachable, and unimaginative people. What will it do with the man who is poor all round, the rather spiritless, rather incompetent low-grade man who on earth sits in the den of the sweater, tramps the streets under the banner of the unemployed, or trembles in another man's cast-off clothing, and with an infinity of hat-touching, on the verge of rural employment? These people will have to be in the descendant phase. The species must be engaged in eliminating them. There is no escape from that. And conversely, the people of exceptional quality must be ascendant. The better sort of people, so far as they can be distinguished, must have the fullest freedom of public service, and the fullest opportunity of parentage, and it must be open to every man to approve himself worthy of ascendancy. The way of nature in this process is to kill the weaker and the sillier, to crush them, to starve them, to overwhelm them, using the stronger and more cunning as her weapon. But man is the unnatural animal, the rebel child of nature, and more does he turn himself against the harsh and fitful hand that reared him. He sees with a growing resentment the multitude of suffering ineffectual lives over which his species tramples in its ascent. In the modern Utopia he will have set himself to change the ancient law. No longer will it be that failures must suffer and perish lest their breed increase, but the breed of failure must not increase lest they suffer and perish, and the race with them. Now we need not argue here to prove that the resources of the world and the energy of mankind, were they organized sanely, are amply sufficient to supply every material need of every living human being. And if it can be so contrived that every human being shall live in a state of reasonable physical and mental comfort without the reproduction of inferior types, there is no reason whatever why that should not be secured. But there must be a competition in life of some sort to determine who are to be pushed to the edge, and who are to prevail and multiply. Whatever we do, man will remain a competitive creature, and though moral and intellectual training may vary and enlarge his conception of success and fortify him with refinements and consolations, no utopia will ever save him completely from the emotional drama of struggle, from exaltations and humiliations, from pride and prostration and shame. He lives in success and failure just as inevitably as he lives in space and time. But we may do much to make the margin of failure endurable. On earth, for all the extravagance of charity, the struggle for the mass of men at the bottom resolves itself into a struggle, and often a very foul and ugly struggle, for food, shelter, and clothing. Deaths outright from exposure and starvation are now perhaps uncommon, but for the multitude there are only miserable houses, uncomfortable clothes, and bad and insufficient food, fractional starvation and exposure, that is to say. A utopia planned upon modern lines will certainly have put an end to that. It will insist upon every citizen being properly housed, well nourished, and in good health, reasonably clean and clothed healthfully, and upon that insistence its labour laws will be founded. In a phrasing that will be familiar to everyone interested in social reform, it will maintain a standard of life. Any house, unless it be a public monument, that does not come up to its rising standard of healthiness and convenience, the Utopian state will incontinently pull down and pile the material and charge the owner for the labour. Any house unduly crowded or dirty, it must in some effectual manner, directly or indirectly, confiscate and clear and clean. And any citizen indecently dressed, or ragged and dirty, or publicly unhealthy, or sleeping abroad homeless, or in any way neglected or derelict, must come under its care. It will find him work if he can and will work. It will take him to it. It will register him and lend him the money wherewith to lead a comely life until work can be found or made for him. And it will give him credit and shelter him, and strengthen him if he is ill. In default of private enterprises, it will provide inns for him and food, and it will, by itself acting as the reserve employer, maintain a minimum wage which will cover the cost of a decent life. The state will stand at the back of the economic struggle as the reserve employer of labour. This most excellent idea does, as a matter of fact, underlie the British institution of the workhouse, but is jumbled up with the relief of old age and infirmity. It is administered parochially, and on the supposition that all population is static and localized, whereas every year it becomes more migratory. It is administered without any regard to the rising standards of comfort and self-respect in a progressive civilization, and it is administered grudgingly. The thing that is done as unwilling charity by administrators, who are often, in the rural districts at least, competing for low-priced labour, and who regard want of employment as a crime. But if it were possible for any citizen in need of money to resort to a place of public employment as a right, and there work for a week or month without degradation upon certain minimum terms, it seems fairly certain that no one would work, except as the victim of some quite exceptional and temporary accident, for less. The work publicly provided would have to be toilsome, but not cruel or incapacitating. A choice of occupations would need to be afforded, occupations adapted to different types of training and capacity, with some residual employment of a purely laborious and mechanical sort for those who were incapable of doing things that required intelligence. Necessarily, this employment by the state would be a relief of economic pressure, but it would not be considered a charity done to the individual, but a public service. It need not pay any more than the police need pay, but it could probably be done at a small margin of loss. There is a number of durable things bound finally to be useful that could be made and stored whenever the tide of more highly paid employment ebbed and labour sank to its minimum. Bricks, iron from inferior ores, shaped and preserved timber, pens, nails, plain fabrics of cotton and linen, paper, sheet glass, artificial fuel, and so on. New roads could be made and public buildings reconstructed, inconveniences of all sorts removed, until under the stimulus of accumulating material, accumulating investments or other circumstances, the tide of private enterprise flowed again. The state would provide these things for its citizen, as though it was his right to require them. He would receive as a shareholder in the common enterprise and not with any insult of charity. But on the other hand, it will require that the citizen who renders the minimum of service for these concessions shall not become a parent until he is established in a work at a rate above the minimum, and free of any debt he may have incurred. The state will never press for its debt, nor put a limit to its accumulation so long as a man or woman remains childless. It will not even grudge them temporary spells of good fortune when they may lift their earnings above the minimum wage. It will pension the age of everyone who cares to take a pension, and it will maintain special guest homes for the very old to which they may come as paying guests, spending their pensions there. By such obvious devices, it will achieve the maximum elimination of its feeble and spiritless folk in every generation, with the minimum of suffering and public disorder. Section 2. But the mildly incompetent, the spiritless and dull, the poorer sort who are ill, do not exhaust our utopian problem. There remain idiots and lunatics. There remain perverse and incompetent persons. There are people of weak character who have become drunkards, drug takers and the like. Then there are persons tainted with certain foul and transmissible diseases. All these people spoil the world for others. They may become parents, and with the most of them there is manifestly nothing to be done but to seclude them from the great body of the population. You must resort to a kind of social surgery. You cannot have social freedom in your public ways. Your children cannot speak with whom they will. Your girls and gentlewomen cannot go abroad while some sorts of people go free. And there are violent people, and those people who will not respect the property of others, thieves and cheats. They too, so soon as their nature is confirmed, must pass out of the free life of the ordered world. So soon as there can be no doubt of the disease or baseness of the individual, so soon as the insanity or other disease is assured, or the crime repeated a third time, or the drunkenness or misdemeanour past its seventh occasion, let us say, so soon must he or she pass out of the common ways of men. The dreadfulness of all such proposals as this lies in the possibility of their execution falling into the hands of hard, dull, and cruel administrators. But in the case of a Utopia, one assumes the best possible government, a government as merciful and deliberate as it is powerful and decisive. You must not too hastily imagine these things being done as they would be done on earth at present by a number of zealous, half-educated people in a state of panic at a quite imaginary rapid multiplication of the unfit. No doubt for first offenders, and for all offenders under 25, the modern Utopia will attempt cautionary and remedial treatment. There will be disciplinary schools and colleges for the young, fair and happy places, but with less confidence and more restraint than the schools and colleges of the ordinary world. In remote and solitary regions these enclosures will lie. They will be fenced in and forbidden to the common run of men, and there, remote from all temptation, the defective citizen will be schooled. There will be no masking of the lesson. Which do you value most? The wide world of humanity, or this evil trend in you? From that discipline, at last, the prisoner will return. But the others, what would a saner world do with them? Our world is still vindictive, but the all-reaching state of Utopia will have the strength that begets mercy. Quietly the outcast will go from among his fellow men. There will be no drumming of him out of the ranks, no tearing off of epaulettes, no smiting in the face. The thing must be just public enough to obviate secret tyrannies, and that is all. There would be no killing, no lethal chambers. No doubt Utopia will kill all deformed and monstrous and evilly diseased births. But for the rest, the state will hold itself accountable for their being. There is no justice in nature, perhaps, but the idea of justice must be sacred in any good society. Lives that statesmanship has permitted, errors it has not foreseen and educated against, must not be punished by death. If the state does not keep faith, no one will keep faith. Crime and bad lives are the measure of a state's failure. All crime in the end is the crime of the community. Even for murder, Utopia will not, I think, kill. I doubt even if there will be jails. No men are quite wise enough, good enough, and cheap enough to staff jails as a jail ought to be staffed. Perhaps islands will be chosen, islands lying apart from the highways of the sea, and to these the state will send its exiles, most of them thinking heaven, no doubt, to be quit of a world of prigs. The state will, of course, secure itself against any children from these people. That is the primary object in their seclusion, and perhaps it may even be necessary to make these island prisons a system of island monasteries and island nunneries. Upon that I am not competent to speak. But if I may believe the literature of the subject, unhappily a not very well criticized literature, it is not necessary to enforce this separation. Footnote. See, for example, Dr. W. A. Chappell's The Fertility of the Unfit. About such islands patrol boats will go. There will be no freedoms of boat building, and it may be necessary to have armed guards at the creeks and quays. Beyond that, the state will give these segregated failures just as full a liberty as they can have. If it interferes any further, it will be simply to police the islands against the organization of serious cruelty, to maintain the freedom of any of the detained who wish it to transfer themselves to other islands, and so to keep a check upon tyranny. The insane, of course, will demand care and control, but there is no reason why the islands of the hopeless drunkard, for example, should not each have a virtual autonomy, have at the most a resident and a guard. I believe that a community of drunkards might be capable of organizing even its own bad habit to the pitch of tolerable existence. I do not see why such an island should not build and order for itself, and manufacture and trade. Your ways are not our ways, the world state will say. But here is freedom, and a company of kindred souls. Elect your jolly rulers, brew if you will, and distill. Here are vine cuttings and barley fields. Do as it pleases you to do. We will take care of the knives, but for the rest, deal yourselves with God. And you see the big convict steamship standing into the island of incurable cheats. The crew are respectfully at their quarters, ready to lend a hand overboard, but wide awake, and the captain is hospitably on the bridge to bid his guests good-bye and to keep an eye on the movables. The new citizens for this particular Alsatia, each no doubt with its personal belongings securely packed and in hand, crowd the deck and study the nearing coast. Bright, keen faces would be there, and we, were we by any chance to find ourselves beside the captain, might recognise the double of this great earthly magnate or that, Petticoat Lane and Park Lane cheek by jowl. The landing part of the jetty is clear of people. Only a government man or so stands there to receive the boat and prevent a rush, but beside the gates a number of engagingly smart-looking individuals loiter speculatively. One figures a remarkable building labelled Custom House, an interesting fiscal revival this population has made, and beyond, crowding up the hill, the painted walls of a number of comfortable inns clamour loudly. One or two inhabitants in reduced circumstances would act as hotel touts. There are several hotel omnibuses and a bureau de change, certainly a bureau de change, and a small house with a large board, aimed point-blank seaward, declares itself a gratis information office, and next to it rises the graceful dome of a small casino. Beyond, great hoardings proclaim the advantages of many island specialties, a hustling commerce, and the opening of a public lottery. There is a large, cheap-looking barrack, the School of Commercial Science for gentlemen of inadequate training. Altogether a very go-ahead-looking little port it would be, and though this disembarkation would have none of the flow of hilarious good fellowship that would throw a halo of genial noise about the islands of drink, it is doubtful if the new arrivals would feel anything very tragic in the moment. Here at last was scope for adventure after their hearts. This sounds more fantastic than it is, but what else is there to do unless you kill? You must seclude, but why should you torment? All modern prisons are places of torture by restraint, and the habitual criminal plays the part of a damaged mouse at the mercy of the cat of our law. He has his little painful run, and back he comes again to a state more horrible even than destitution. There are no Alsatias left in the world. For my own part I can think of no crime, unless it is the reckless begetting or wilful transmission of contagious disease, for which the bleak terrors, the solitudes, the ignominies of the modern prison do not seem outrageously cruel. If you want to go as far as that, then kill. Why, once you are rid of them, should you pester criminals to respect an uncongenial standard of conduct? Into such islands of exile as this, a modern Utopia will have to purge itself. There is no alternative that I can contrive. Section 3. Will a Utopian be free to be idle? Work has to be done. Every day humanity is sustained by its collective effort, and without a constant recurrence of effort in the single man as in the race as a whole, there is neither health nor happiness. The permanent idleness of a human being is not only burthensome to the world, but his own secure misery. But unprofitable occupation is also intended by idleness, and it may be considered whether that freedom also will be open to the Utopian. Conceivably it will, like privacy, locomotion, and almost all the freedoms of life, and on the same terms, if he possess the money to pay for it. That last condition may produce a shock in minds accustomed to the proposition that money is the root of all evil, and to the idea that Utopia necessarily implies something rather oaken and handmade and primitive in all these relations. Of course, money is not the root of any evil in the world. The root of all evil in the world, and the root of all good too, is the will to live, and money becomes harmful only when, by bad laws and bad economic organization, it is more easily attained by bad men than good. It is as reasonable to say food is the root of all disease, because so many people suffer from excessive and unwise eating. The sane economic ideal is to make the possession of money the clear indication of public serviceableness, and the more nearly that ideal is attained, the smaller is the justification of poverty, and the less the hardship of being poor. In barbaric and disorderly countries, it is almost honourable to be indigent, and unquestionably virtuous to give to a beggar. And even in the more or less civilized societies of earth, so many children come into this life hopelessly handicapped, that austerity to the poor is regarded as the meanest of mean virtues. But in Utopia, everyone will have had an education and a certain minimum of nutrition and training. Everyone will be insured against ill health and accidents. There will be the most efficient organization for balancing the pressure of employment in the presence of disengaged labor, and so to be moneyless will be clear evidence of unworthiness. In Utopia, no one will dream of giving to a casual beggar, and no one will dream of begging. There will need to be, in the place of the British casual wards, simple but comfortable inns with a low tariff, controlled to a certain extent no doubt, and even in some cases maintained by the state. This tariff will have such a definite relation to the minimum permissible wage that a man who has incurred no liabilities through marriage or the like relationship will be able to live in comfort and decency upon that minimum wage, pay his small insurance premium against disease, death, disablement, or ripening years, and have a margin for clothing and other personal expenses. But he will get neither shelter nor food except at the price of his freedom, unless he can produce money. But suppose a man without money in a district where employment is not to be found for him. Suppose the amount of employment to have diminished in the district with such suddenness as to stranded him there. Or suppose he has quarrelled with the only possible employer, or that he does not like this particular work. Then no doubt the Utopian state, which wants everyone to be just as happy as the future welfare of the race permits, will come to his assistance. One imagines him resorting to a neat and business-like post office, and stating his case to a civil and intelligent official. In any sane state, the economic conditions of every quarter of the earth will be watched as constantly as its meteorological phases, and a daily map of the country within a radius of 300 or 400 miles, showing all the places where labour is needed, will hang upon the post office wall. To this his attention will be directed. The man out of work will decide to try his luck in this place or that, and the public servant, the official, will make a note of his name, verify his identity. The freedom of Utopia will not be incompatible with the universal registration of thumb marks, and issue passes for travel and coupons for any necessary inn accommodation on his way to the chosen destination. There he will seek a new employer. Such a free change of locality once or twice a year from a region of restricted employment to a region of labour shortage will be among the general privileges of the Utopian citizen. But suppose that in no district in the world is there work within the capacity of this particular man. Before we suppose that, we must take into consideration the general assumption one is permitted to make in all Utopian speculations. All Utopians will be reasonably well educated upon Utopian lines. There will be no illiterates unless they are unteachable imbeciles, no rule of thumb toilers as inadaptable as trained beasts. The Utopian worker will be as versatile as any well-educated man is on earth today, and no trade union will impose a limit to his activities. The world will be his union. If the work he does best and likes best is not to be found, there is still work he likes second best. Lacking his proper employment, he will turn to some kindred trade. But even with that adaptability, it may be that sometimes he will not find work. Such a disproportion between the work to be done and the people to do it may arise as to present a surplus of labour everywhere. This disproportion may be due to two causes: to an increase of population without a corresponding increase of enterprises, or to a diminution of employment throughout the world due to the completion of great enterprises, to economies achieved, or to the operation of new and more efficient labour-saving appliances. Through either cause, a world state may find itself doing well, except for an excess of citizens of mediocre and lower quality. But the first cause may be anticipated by wise marriage laws. The full discussion of these laws will come later, but here one may insist that Utopia will control the increase of its population. Without the determination and ability to limit that increase as well as to stimulate it whenever it is necessary, no Utopia is possible. That was clearly demonstrated by Malthus for all time. The second cause is not so easily anticipated, but then, though its immediate result in glutting the labour market is similar, its final consequences are entirely different from those of the first. The whole trend of a scientific mechanical civilization is continually to replace labour by machinery and to increase it in its effectiveness by organization, and so quite independently of any increase in population, labour must either fall in value until it can compete against and check the cheapening process, or if that is prevented, as it will be in Utopia, by a minimum wage, come out of employment. There is no apparent limit to this process. But a surplus of efficient labour at the minimum wage is exactly the condition that should stimulate new enterprises, and that in a state saturated with science and prolific in invention will stimulate new enterprises. An increasing surplus of available labour without an absolute increase of population, an increasing surplus of labour due to increasing economy and not to proliferation, and which therefore does not press on and disarrange the food supply, is surely the ideal condition for a progressive civilization. I am inclined to think, since labour will be regarded as a delocalized and fluid force, it will be the world state and not the big municipalities ruling the force areas that will be the reserve employer of labour. Very probably it will be convenient for the state to hand over the surplus labour for municipal purposes, but that is another question. All over the world the labour exchanges will be reporting the fluctuating pressure of economic demand and transferring workers from this region of excess to that of scarcity. And whenever the excess is universal, the world state, failing an adequate development of private enterprise, will either reduce the working day and so absorb the excess, or set on foot some permanent special works of its own, paying the minimum wage and allowing them to progress just as slowly or just as rapidly as the ebb and flow of labour dictated. But with sane marriage and birth laws there is no reason to suppose such calls upon the resources and initiative of the world more than temporary and exceptional occasions. End of chapter the 5th. Sections 1 through 3. Recording by Christopher Taylor.